Hello, Brobs. We're back with The Peculiarity of Literature, an Allegorical Approach to Poe's Fiction by Jeffrey DeShell, a 1997 book of explication, obviously on Edgar Poe. Allen, for those intimate with him. And we shall start this up. Chapter 1. C1? No, Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The peculiarity of literature, an allegorical approach. Change Poe. Save. Hello, Bobs. Why does it take so long to save this? There we go. Fuck. I don't want a live thumbnail. I want the chat open now. Now. All right. We got that. Once it loads, we shall load up on guns. Mental guns. Chat. The Peculiarity of Literature, an Allegorical Approach to Poe's Fiction, Chapter 1. Allegory. Any person, any object, any relationship can mean absolutely anything else. Walter Benjamin. The origin of German tragic drama. The universe in which the constellation of allegorical criticism is figured is the universe of language. It is impossible to overestimate the importance the exploration and interrogation of language has in the work of Walter Benjamin. Language is not simply one phenomenon among others. It is the critical phenomenon that grounds all others, including art, translation, criticism, philosophy, and theology. As Michael W. Jennings phrases it, for Benjamin, language holds the key to man's ability to know the absolute as well as his own world. It serves as the mystical binding element in a harmonious tripartite relationship between God, man, and nature. Any discussion of Benjamin's critical project must begin with a look at his thinking about language. And I don't understand why he starts off with Walter Benjamin in a book about Poe, but I mean, I can understand introducing him to the subject, but come on. In the essay, On Language as Such and On the Language of Man, Übersprach, Überhaupt, and Über die Sprache des Menschen, written in 1916 and published in 1955, Benjamin immediately opens up his definition of language to include phenomena not normally associated with language. In the very first sentence of the essay, he writes, every expression of human mental life can be understood as a kind of language. All communication of mental meanings is language communication, in words being only a particular case of human language, and of the justice, poetry, or whatever underlying it or founded on it, there is no event or thing in either animate or inanimate nature that does not in some way partake of language. No, I don't read children's books. I didn't read them when I was a child either. Immediately, then, Benjamin makes it clear that he is not concerned with the everyday use of the term language, nor is he concerned with individual language acts or specific speech occurrences. When Benjamin uses the term language, der Sprach, he is concerned with the nature of language, with language generally speaking, with language as such, der Sprach überhaupt. It is important to realize that for Benjamin, language is all pervasive. It is every expression of human mental life, all communication of mental meanings, and there is no event or thing in either animate or inanimate nature that does not involve or partake of language. Language is not limited to human expression or the communication of meaning. While it is the expression of human mentality, everything in nature, animate or otherwise, in some way partakes of it. Language is not necessarily or primarily a human experience. After expanding the general definition of language, Benjamin distinguishes two types of communication: the communication of mental entities and the communication of linguistic entities. The thing expressed has three component parts: the thing itself, its mental entity, which is the picture we get of the thing in our minds, and its linguistic entity, which is the word corresponding to the thing. In the expression, the thing itself is never communicated. When we say the word cat, the actual cat never appears, and we receive only a mental picture of the cat in our minds. According to Benjamin, even this mental picture is secondary. What the word primarily communicates is the word cat itself. Both the thing itself and the mental being of that thing are subordinated to the linguistic entity of the word. Benjamin, maybe his name is Benjamin since he's a German. Benjamin writes, language therefore communicates the particular linguistic being of things, but their mental being only insofar as this is directly included in their linguistic being, insofar as it is capable of being communicated. OL 316. Language primarily communicates the linguistic being of things and communicates the mental entity only secondarily, only insofar as it is capable of being communicated. The linguistic entity of things is language itself. Benjamin writes, language communicates the linguistic being of things. The clearest manifestation of this being, however, is language itself. Language is the linguistic being of anything, and so in communicating, language primarily communicates itself. The answer to the question, what does language communicate, is therefore, all language communicates itself. Well, god damn. I could have told you that without a whole paragraph of nonsense. There are three important points implied by the concept that language primarily communicates itself. The first is that it is language itself which communicates in language as such. That is, it is language which speaks. And this speaking is a function of language and not a property. Is this guy going to talk about Edgar Allan Poe? I don't understand why this son of a bitch is writing a whole chapter and it's about Benjamin. Why? There are three important points implied by the concept that language primarily communicates itself. The first is that it is language itself which communicates in language as such. That is, it is language which speaks, and this speaking is a function of language and not a property of any individualized human consciousness. Language as such is distinguished from human language. Language as such is dehumanized, indifferent to any human speaker. Benjamin writes, languages therefore have no speaker, if this means someone who communicates through these languages. Language as such does not originate with man, and it does not serve man primarily as a tool to communicate from one human consciousness to another. The second point we learn from the idea that language primarily communicates itself is that language as such is not a medium. It does not mediate between human beings or between objects of the world and human beings. As we shall see in our discussion of the naming language below, language as such was immediate. It was the glue which bonded man, God, and nature together. Language as such did not serve to carry meaning from one thing to another. Rather, it was a condition of an intimacy indifferent to the differentiation implied by communication. Language as such speaks itself and grounds itself in itself. The concept that language as such grounds itself implies the third important idea, that of the non-referentiality of language as such. This is to say that language as such does not depend on any outside referent to justify it or grant to it significance or meaning. Language as such is self-contained. The linguistic entity is not dependent on the mental entity or the object itself for its existence. Language as such, or pure language, was centered on the name. In Genesis, God created the world by naming it. In God's language, the name, which is the most concrete and particular unit of language, served both to create the object and convey the pure, unmediated knowledge of that object to God. God's language is the most pure and perfect language because in God's language, creation and knowledge are one. In God name, is this supposed to be God's name? In God name is creative because it is word, and God's word is cognizant because it is name. The absolute relation of name to knowledge exists only in God. Only there is name because it is inwardly identical with the creative word, the pure medium of knowledge. Only God can create and immediately know. This immediate creating and knowing occurs in his naming. God created man separately from the world. God did not name man, did not subject man to his naming language, but rather gave man the gift of this language. Benjamin writes, God did not create man from the word and did not name him. He did not wish to subject him to language, but in man God set language, which had served him as a medium of creation, free. Just as God's naming language united his creative word with immediate knowledge, man's naming language allowed him to unite the linguistic and mental entities of things. These two spheres, the communicating, the linguistic sphere and the communicable, the mental sphere, which are clearly distinguished yet united only in the name language of man, 320 emphasis, mine. With this naming language, there was effectively no difference between the name, the image, and the thing. All were united in and as language. This uniting of the linguistic and mental entities of nature in the name served to complete God's creation. 319. Man's naming did more than allow him nature. It also allowed him to bind himself immediately to God. In the action of naming, man united his own mental and linguistic beings in language. Benjamin writes, in naming the mental being of man communicates itself to God. In naming, the mental entity that communicates itself is language. Name was the heritage of human language vouches for the fact that language as such is the mental being of man, and only for this reason is the mental being of man, alone among all mental entities, communicable without residue. Both man's mental and linguistic beings are language. This is how he can communicate himself without residue to God. In naming man, In naming, man became language. In the name, man gained immediate knowledge of nature, communicated himself to God, and bound nature, himself, and God in an immediate and pure relationship. As Jennings puts it, each element of the ideal world, nature, man, and God, depends upon each other element, and all three elements are strictly dependent upon the proper use of language for the maintenance of the relationship. In the pre-lapsarian idyllic world, God's language was pure because it united knowledge with creation. Man's language approximated God's language in that it united the mental and linguistic beings of man and nature in the name. Here, nature's mute language spoke strongly to man. Man lived in harmony with nature because he had immediate knowledge of the things of the world, and he lived in harmony with God because through the name he could express himself without residue to him. With the fall of language, however, this harmony and immediacy was disrupted. The fall of language and the fall of man, since man's destiny is inextricably bound up with language, occurred when the pure, immediate, concrete knowledge of the name was replaced by the derivative, abstract, mediating knowledge of signs and symbols. With this mediation came the concepts of good and evil. Benjamin writes, and I don't know why we're still going on with Benjamin. Knowledge of good and evil abandons name. It is a knowledge from outside, the uncreated imitation of the creative word. Name steps outside itself in this knowledge. The fall marks the birth of the human word, in which name no longer lives intact, and which has stepped out of name language. The language of knowledge from what we may call its own immanent magic, in order to become expressly, as it were, magical. The word must communicate something other than itself. That is really the fall of language mind. The fall of language occurred when an external knowledge, external language, the knowledge of good and evil, the language of judgment, usurped the pure concrete immediate knowledge of the name. This abstract external knowledge interrupted the immediate concrete knowledge man enjoyed of things and man from nature, alienated man from nature. Because man was alienated from nature, nature fell silent, and as man could no longer hear nature's mute language, he could no longer name nature, and thus the communication without residue from man to God was destroyed. And so God moved away from man, and man fell from paradise, the paradise of pure language. This was the birth of the human word, the birth of referentiality, the birth of the sign, and the birth of the plurality of languages. Man makes language a means, and therefore also, in one part at any rate, a mere sign, and this later results in the plurality of languages. To sum up, before the fall of language, man existed in a paradisiacal state, where he gained immediate knowledge of nature by naming. In this act of naming, man approximated the creative word of God and united the linguistic entities and the mental entities of things into a pure immediate knowledge, while at the same time uniting his own linguistic and mental entities, and thus expressing himself perfectly to God. In this pre-lapsarian paradise, man, nature, and God were united by language into a close binding relationship. In paradise, language was grounded in itself. It primarily communicated itself. This paradisiacal language is known as language as such. With the fall, however, an external element was added to language, the abstract notion of good and evil. This abstract external element interjected itself between man and the objects of nature and changed the pure immediate language of knowledge into a referential, mediating language of judgment. The objects of nature no longer spoke to man, and man could no longer name them, and so he could no longer express himself adequately to God. God, nature, and man became alienated from each other. The concrete, immediate, pure language of knowledge found in the name has been replaced by the abstract, mediating, referential language of signs found in the world. This fallen language is called the word language of man. We see that the world language of man, our language, is a fallen, corrupt language. However, there still exist traces of the pre-lapsarian, immediate naming language here on earth, but these traces, these sparks, are buried deep in the word language of man. It becomes the reader's task to attempt to destroy the signifying word language of texts and to perhaps liberate the remaining shards of pure language. Of language as such, there exist two methods for this destruction: the translation of one language into another, and the allegorical criticism of literary or artistic texts. Criticism and translation are thus spiritual or sacred activities. They are the exploration and interrogation of our fallen language in order to transcend this fallen language and experience the pure language of paradise. What a bunch of bullshit this is. How many more fucking pages of this moronic bullshit must I read? The answer is none, because this shit goes on for 30 pages more, 24 pages more. And I don't even know if he mentions Poe in this whole fucking first chapter. I'm starting to believe he doesn't. The term translation, Übersetzung, designates a linguistic operation that for Benjamin occurs on many levels. I'm going to stop right here and and see if this ever gets to Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, what a fucking shit storm this is. Let's see what the fucking thing says. Maybe I should have read those. Goodreads comments about the book. The ratings, they give it a 3.25. So far, I give it about a negative 0.8. And there's not even a single review. I mean, it's too dumb to even review it. I'm literally at the point where I'm not going to read this. This first section really has nothing to do with Poe. It's like this guy wanted to write 2 books, and so he did them both. This gets 1 review. The peculiarity of literature, an allegorical approach to Poe's fiction, was definitely not what I expected as far as subject matter is concerned. Not long after beginning what I thought would be a delightful journey through Poe's macabre fiction from an allegorical perspective, I realized that the definition of allegorical that accompanied me would not make it past the preface. DeShell's goal was not to prove that Poe's fiction served as a moral agent existing for the betterment of mankind, in the same fashion as John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. Instead, Dr. DeShell's thesis dwells in a much deeper catacomb of abstract metaphysical decor, with a similar end result, but far different means than the traditional interpretations of Christians journey in Bunyan's work. In The Peculiarity of Literature, Geoffrey DeShell articulates the ideas that support the reading of literature from an allegorical perspective. He only spends less than half the book dealing intimately with Edgar Allan Poe, but as he explains in the preface, this is one of the key components of the allegorical approach. In reference to the allegorical critic Walter Benjamin, DeShell writes, because Benjamin's work lacks any intention with regard to Poe's fiction, it is able to avoid the seductions and illusions of traditional criticism. DeShell later describes this approach as the fleeting touch of allegorical criticism. The first three chapters are spent defining and defending the allegorical perspective, obviously based upon the fact that it takes the author three chapters to explain the definition. This book was a difficult read. The base of DeShell's argument is found in his interpretation of the biblical account of creation. What a fucking shit show this book is. The author spends the last two chapters, 4 and 5, showcasing allegorical criticism through several of Poe's works. In chapter 4, by using the purloined letter, DeShell explains his theories by interpreting Poe's story as the mystery of the missing fiction as opposed to the mystery of the missing letter. Around this point, due to my limited knowledge, his argument became a little shady and confusing. However, in chapter 5, he adequately wrapped up his thesis by pointing out evidence of pure language in several of Poe's short stories. DeShell achieves this by explaining Poe's representations of death, namely in the characters of Lygia and Lady Rowena, Morella and Berenice, revivifications of corpses in The Black Cat and The Telltale Heart, illustration of Valdemar's strange state of being, and inclusion of the final sound of Fortunato as he is being walled up, the jingling of bells. All of DeShell's examples center around the pure language of death, that area somewhere between the signified and signifier that cannot possibly be expressed in terms of any truth. Why not? Because no one has ever truly experienced death and lived to tell about it. The only way, according to DeShell. Of course, the apparent loopholes in DeShell's thinking are obvious. I am referring specifically to his claims that truth cannot be attained, but only hinted at, and his use of traditional criticism to hitch a ride. DeShell's work is written to traditional critics wallowing in the belly of Satan who define literature. All right, this guy's convinced me that this book is a piece of shit. And I will stop reading right here at the 28-minute mark because this book is a piece of fucking garbage. I may throw this book into the fire. That's all. I got nothing more to say. What a waste of an hour I spent reading what I read. Fucking morass. Alright, that's all.